Ghosts in the storm. I've tried for so long to tell the truth. I've tried so long that a lie became more convenient. I wrote countless emails and made phone calls, but they didn't want to listen. And honestly, I can't even blame them. It sounds crazy. If even half of what I've told them were true, it would completely change their worldview forever. It started with small lies. I stopped saying that I'd seen something. But even then, they thought it was tasteless to talk about it. They still believed I was lying or exaggerating the truth to cover up something sinister. And to be honest, I'm tired. I'm tired of trying to seem credible. So I'll write the truth down one last time and then never talk about it again. This just has to stop. I've never liked the term storm chaser. It makes it sound like a fun hobby, and while it's commonly used, it's not just about the thrill. We provide real and tangible services. The NWS relies on real-time updates about air pressure, wind direction, rainfall amount, and surface conditions. Wind speed, direction, and at least a dozen other data points are factored in. This information is considered when issuing warnings and alerting emergency services in affected areas. At that time, I worked with two other guys. We drove in separate vehicles, the two of them up front and me following in a support vehicle. Javier, the tech guy, made sure our phones worked even in bad weather and kept us updated via satellite, radar, and mesoscale analyses. He was also in charge of the radio, ensuring we received all the information from police, fire, emergency services, CB radio, or military frequencies. It was mostly the Air Force, but occasionally the Navy. The second guy was Reed. This stocky bloke was literally a veteran. He came back from Afghanistan and thought, all right, let's check out some tornadoes. And that's exactly what he did. He educated himself and got a job as a forensic meteorologist. Yep, that's a thing. Years later, he started his own company, the one I worked for. We were out collecting data on a storm brewing about 6 kilometers north of a small town in Minnesota, near Rochester. The initial forecasts said the storm would pass east of Madison, but then there was a sudden westward shift. New measurements were needed on the ground, and it looked like a nasty surprise. There were no severe weather warnings until just before cloud. The thing ballooned into a monster as we passed through Stewartville. We briefly checked out the damage along the road. It didn't seem like much. Just a few young trees snapped along the tree line. But we were on the edge of the action. Those were just the first signs. We could see that the road conditions ahead would lead us straight into hell. Then I heard Reed on the radio, reacting in real time. Ha ha ha, it's gonna hail, mark my words, he laughed. No way, said Javier. The pressure isn't right for that. I chimed in. When the boss says it's gonna hail, it's probably gonna hail. At least I hired one competent person here, joked Javier. You should call him a hail chaser, he teased. We didn't stick to the speed limit, but driving in harsh conditions was part of the job. Our vehicles were regularly checked to ensure they could handle a lot. Belt and braces, as they say, because the last thing you want is to get stuck in a cyclone. We drove through Rochester and northeast past Kellogg. Chances were we'd have to cross the Mississippi. The first part of the storm was just passing Maxwell. Javier couldn't help but grin. The storm's making a quick turn, a really quick turn. I could almost hear him shaking his head. Hailstorms don't move like that, he added. You're talking crap, laughed Reed. You'll see. The road seemed clear as we drove across the Wabasha-Nelson Bridge. The sun was setting, creating a stark contrast between the dark clouds and the red sky. We slowed down to get a better look. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. That's what hail looks like, said Reed. No, that's bundled up, isn't it? Javier sighed. Did the Rockies cause that? No way, I heard over the radio. Unless the Rockies somehow moved to New England. Ha 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 ha, girls. Reed laughed. Lucky you're both pretty. On the other side of the bridge, there was a rest stop. We pulled in to check the weather station and take the first shift change. Have you double-checked the power supply, as we had a lot of equipment running and didn't want any of it failing in the heat of the moment. He read off a checklist aloud while Reed and I took a closer look at the storm. Do you really think it's gonna hail? I asked. Could just be a nasty downpour. No, it's hail, he nodded. You get a feel for it, you can smell it. Smell it? I said. All I smell is shit. Exactly, he pointed south. Strong movement westward ahead. Strong winds were blowing, enough to knock over more than a few young trees along the road and cause significant damage. A quick check of the weather station confirmed it. The wind direction was shifting rapidly and increasing in strength. We headed further north towards Wisconsin, then southeast down the 35, getting a better view of the storm. Something just felt off. I'd only worked with Reed for 18 months, but, as he'd said before, you could kind of smell it. And I did. We drove another 10 to 20 minutes, pulled over to update our readings, while Javier updated the local NWS office's data. Reed stopped to have a smoke. The wind picked up, and the anemometer spun faster and faster. Reed was struggling to light his cigarette, which worried him a bit. Rain or shine, he could always light a damn cigarette. "This doesn't look good," he said. "Not one bit." "What do you mean by that?" I asked. He sighed, shielding his lighter. "It looks worse than hail." "Are we talking tornado?" I asked. He shook his head, finally getting a spark. "No," he sighed. "That's not it." We drove for about 10 more minutes south. The clouds were closing in and I could feel the rising humidity clinging to my skin. I cranked the air conditioning. "We need to stop for another measurement," Javier decided. "We're almost in the thick of it." "Let's turn back," said Reed. "No way," laughed Javier. "No, we're not. That's a retreat. We're turning back. We have no idea what we're getting into." "You don't have a clue," snapped Reed. "You have no idea at all, do ya?" Reed let the pause hang in the air. I could feel the tension. "All right," Javier finally said. "I guess we're turning back." The tires squealed as Reed made the U-turn. I saw flashes of light in the rearview mirror, then came the thunder. "Yeah, it's picking up," said Reed. "So it's not hail," chuckled Javier. "I have no idea what the hell this is." "I told you it's not hail," I said. "Now's not the time to be a smug prick," Reed interrupted. "Reed thinks we could cut it off at Nelson and come out behind it." As he explained his plan, I noticed Javier had gone quiet. The bloke was more joker than man, and suddenly he wasn't in the mood. That was a bad sign. We kept sending updates to the local NWS office, and within minutes, a severe weather warning was issued. I got one too. Reed sped north on the 25, hoping we'd make it far enough before getting caught in the storm's center. With a bit of luck, we'd get more accurate readings on the other side and be home before midnight. We weren't that lucky. The storm intensified, and we found ourselves in the back end of its northern edge. First, the rain hit us. I kept an eye on Reed's car, watching the raindrops collect and disappear with the clack of my windshield wipers. Reed and Javier were arguing about readings, connection issues, and how the power strip was freaking out and overloading the batteries. I could barely make out what they were saying over the radio. Suddenly, I could smell it. Like I said, you smell it just before it happens. I bet Reed had smelled it too. The first lightning strike came out of nowhere. I've seen bad weather, been in it, slept through it, but this wasn't just bad weather, it was downright disgraceful. It wasn't just rain and thunder. There was something else, so it was only a split second. That one heartbeat when the lightning lit up the sky and everything was silent. No one in the world could have reacted fast enough. And that's where this eerie, unsettling feeling came from. Reed's car kept driving straight ahead, but in that light, I saw something. Shadows cast over the pavement. Reed's car began to skid. The road gripped the wheel, and as he tried to regain control, it was already too late. One wheel went into the ditch. The car lurched forward and spun, nearly flipping over. It veered off the road and was thrown about 10 meters into a nearby field. It looked like a bloody bumper car. I slammed on the brakes and pulled my vehicle to the side of the road. Without even thinking, I grabbed my radio and stormed out of the car. I yelled at them to respond, but they were shouting back at me, practically screaming. In those chaotic first few seconds, we were shouting nonsense at each other. Eventually, I stopped and listened. Reed came through. "Get back in your car." "What?" I said. "Get back in your bloody car." I couldn't think straight, and I was heading out into the field with no protection. In a storm, it's safer to stay in your car because it can act like a kind of Faraday cage. But out there, I was completely exposed. One quick turn on my heel, and I was already heading back to the car. I threw myself onto the passenger seat, and as I slammed the door shut, the sky lit up again. It was a single lightning strike, shooting down from the clouds into Reed's windscreen. In that light, I could see them. There had to be hundreds of them. People. Burnt people. People with exposed bones, cracked skin, and missing limbs, all in various stages of decay and decomposition. They were everywhere, covering the road and surrounding Reed's car. They were just standing there in the white light, staring with dead eyes. And in a fraction of a second, they were gone again. The thunder rolled as the world went dark. Javier burst out of the car. The strike had shattered the windscreen. I couldn't hear Javier over the radio, but I saw him looking in my direction and pointing at the driver's seat. Reed hasn't moved. Lightning doesn't move like that. It strikes the highest point, not the lowest. But this one wasn't following the rules. Javier sprinted across the field towards my car. I left the passenger door open and scrambled over to the driver's seat, urging him on. "Come on," I yelled. "Move it." He was running full pelt, with this wild look in his eyes. His pupils were so dilated, they looked black. But he didn't get far. Another strike hit. This time, it went right through him. I could see his muscles contracting and bursting as his jaw twisted at an unnatural angle. And in that split second, they came back. They surrounded him. I could see them moving across the field by the hundreds, their silhouettes revealed by the lightning, far, and they stared at Javier with their dead eyes. Only one of them looked in my direction. I didn't recognize him at first, but I couldn't help but notice him. He was the only one staring at me. Reed. His eyes were rolled back into his head, and on his barrel chest, a smoldering black spot had spread. He was just as dead as the rest of them. He looked right at me. I was next. I could barely see as the light faded and the figures disappeared before my eyes. My head throbbed under the pressure of the storm as the thunder shook my car. The world looked gray. I think I was temporarily blind because as soon as I blinked, everything turned red. I couldn't even see Reed, who was lying out there in the field. My first instinct was to get to safety. That's what you usually do when you're stuck in a storm. You seek shelter and wait it out. But this time was different. It didn't work for Reed, and I was sure it wouldn't work for me. I barely managed to get out of the car before lightning struck it, burning through the engine block and scorching the asphalt underneath. In the flash of the lightning, I saw them. They were all there, including Javier. His jaw was still twisted and broken. Only now they were all looking at me. They were waiting for me. I stumbled backward and fell. A ditch on the side of the road. Rainwater, nettles, and blue wildflowers covered my clothes. The rain was relentless. My first thought was to get up and run, but I couldn't move my legs. Instead, I curled up, closed my eyes, and tried to make myself as small as possible. One lightning strike after another, but they didn't hit me, and with each strike, the figures drew closer. By the third flash, I was surrounded by the dead, shoulder to shoulder, packed in like sardines. But they didn't say a word. They just came closer, reaching for me. It felt like an eternity. Each flash of light made my heart skip a beat. It seemed like minutes passed with every strike. Eventually, I covered my ears and eyes, but it was impossible not to feel it. It consumed every sense. You can taste it, smell it. It's so bright, it burns through your eyelids. It ripples through your hands as you press them against your ears. It's an immense, godless power. And I could feel it. Hands that didn't have enough time to grab me. The smell of decay as the lightning revealed a hand trying to strangle me, a flash of pain as someone tried to bite my leg. But the flash was over before the dead teeth could pierce my skin. I couldn't fight them off. There were too many, and it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. Desperately, I flailed my arms, trying to protect myself. In a fleeting moment, I looked up. I expected the clouds to move for the storm to blow the rain westward, but that's not what I saw. Up there was an eye, a godlike eye looking directly at me. In hindsight, it must have been as big as a football field. It was so massive I couldn't comprehend it fully. It hovered up there, parting the clouds. With every blink, another strike came down, booming as if searching for me. I counted 18 lightning strikes in the span of a few minutes. It felt like I'd been there for hours. Each bolt lasted longer than the last. But as the rain passed me by, I was left freezing and shaking. The pulling stopped, the biting stopped, the tearing stopped. I was bleeding from cuts and bruises, but I was alive. When I got back on my feet, all that was left was torn up concrete, scorched grass, and 2 bodies. One was still in the driver's seat of his car. The other was face down in the rain. I sat there, stunned and gasping for air. It took me a few minutes to report it. Since then, I've told people about it, but they call it trauma, as if it were just one big, tragic accident waiting to happen. Even people in the field refused to listen, no matter their connection to Reed or his company. A terrible tragedy was all they were willing to say, as if someone like Reed would mess up like that. Lightning doesn't target anyone, they'd say. That doesn't exist. I've tracked the storm for as long as I could, but as far as I can tell, it dissipated somewhere off the Norwegian coast. I read something about flocks of seagulls being pulverized into a feather storm in a fishing village on the northwest coast, but that's where the trail ends. I never had a problem with storms, until now. Now I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I've just heard thunder, and I freak out at sudden flashes of light. I can't bring myself to go outside when it's cloudy. I just feel like, whatever it was, it didn't want me to escape. Maybe I'll find out next time it's near. I can almost smell it.